What we are looking at today is what are the different issues around the things that actually at the end of the day determine whether you are going to pass or fail your test. In other words, the way the marking is done. We're going to look at the whole thing of how to pass your test as well, and what is important and what are common errors. So now the biggest problem we have is this thing. Well, I really do understand it. Everybody's trying to do it as cheaply as they possibly can because it feels really expensive. I absolutely understand that. But guys, if you don't get yourself properly prepared for the actual exam itself, all that happens is going to cost you more money. And that is a very real problem. You don't want to be in a situation where you haven't prepared yourself properly for the exam and then you fail the exam. Because the problem today is the driving tests are difficult to get hold of and they're expensive, and then keeping yourself trained and ready for the test if the test is going to come up, and all these other things that go with those costs. So I really want to ask you can rather be overtrained and do that driving test. It'll be cheaper than taking a risk at passing the test. And honestly, I'm really more than comfortable to give you guys mock tests at really good prices if people want to do mock tests, because I do it all the time. I do a mock test and then we can identify what the problems are, and if you're not passing your test, I really would suggest that we go through a complete mock test so we can identify what the problem is and what the root cause is that's causing the failure. So there are 4 categories of faults, and I mentioned that before. We're going to talk about them today. And then what is the self-checks before any test? And it's all about looking at and watching what you need to have in place to be able to pass the test. Okay, all right. So my favorite thing is I had this guy who was a racing driver, and he was arrogant, beyond arrogant. And he'd been driving, and you don't need a license to be a racing driver because you can start when you're really young and you can do go-karts and things like that. He was a really good driver. I mean, there's no doubt he could drive a car. He could handle a car. He knew what to do with a car. Handbrake turn was just a joke for him. I mean, that was like amateur stuff. The problem was he didn't realize exactly how difficult this driving test is. This driving test is not about your ability to move the car or 20 years of experience in China or wherever. It's not about that at all. And we often find, and this is real, we find people who've been driving here in the UK on their international license for like 5 or 10 years, and they've had their license for 15 years. And then they think, well, I'm comfortable. What do I have to do this? Get me a test and we'll do some prep before the test and then I'll do the test. That's it. It's not going to happen. But you have to let them experience it, so that sometimes it's just, okay, experience this. Let's get it as cheap as possible so you can experience it. And then they come back and then we start again. Okay. So be careful of that, okay? Do you fail for a navigation fault? So somebody, the examiner has said to you, or the sat-nav has said to you, at the roundabout, take the second exit, and you go in and you take the third exit. Yeah, you do not fail for a navigation fault. So if you're coming up to the roundabout and you don't take the second exit, you end up taking maybe the third or the fourth exit, then what's going to happen, as long as you signaled correctly, there's no fault. And then the examiner might ask you, why did you do that? You can just say, look, I'm sorry, blame your driving instructor. My driving instructor always takes the third exit, or my driving instructor always takes this exit. And then he has to sort out the navigation. As long as you've carried it correctly. So if you're coming up to a roundabout and it looks a bit complex and you're confused, put on your left signal, go left, keep your left signal and go out at the first exit. And then right, see if he can get you around the roundabout to go another way. He might bring you back to that roundabout, but then you might be a bit more prepared for it. But do not make a driver fault. And this is the one fault that a lot of people fail on, is they're driving along quite happily on the road and there's a traffic light and they stay in the lane they're in, but they don't realize that there's a lane formed. There's now a lane that's formed on the left hand side which is going to go left or straight, but the lane they are in is a right turn only. And as they come up to the traffic light, they see this white arrow on the ground which says right only. Check your mirrors and turn right at the traffic light. And if the examiner asks you because you're in the wrong lane, to correct that is difficult. And maybe if there's absolutely no traffic, you can stop, look around, put your left signal on, move into the left-hand lane, as long as you've got enough space between yourself and the traffic light to do that. But if there isn't, and you're now in that lane, follow the lane with the correct signals. Take the lane marking as an instruction, a navigational instruction, and follow it. Do not try and do anything fancy, because invariably that will create a fault that you can't deal with. So you're in the wrong lane, you look at the lane marking, you put on your right signal, and you go right at that traffic light, obviously taking care of the oncoming traffic and the pedestrians. And now the examiner says, oh, what happened there? You say, sorry, isn't that the way we were supposed to go? And he says, no, you've made a mistake. You say, oh, I'm sorry about the navigation, or I'm sorry, I got a bit confused. But you know in your heart of hearts, you haven't made a driver fault. You've made a navigation fault, which is quite acceptable. Okay, so a navigation fault is not a fail if you did not make a driver fault. Don't turn a navigation fault into a driver fault. That's all I'm saying. Stick with the lanes you're on. Stick with the signaling you've gone. Forget about the navigation, can be corrected afterwards. All right, so why the UK test is one of the hardest in the world, guys? I'm not joking, right? First of all, this is the one thing that I say to a lot of people. If you look here, 50%, actually it's more than that. And normally it's about, in some test centers, it's only 33% of the people who are taking the test on that day will pass the test. Only 33% who are taking the test will pass that test. Now, if it is anything below, if the pass rate is anything below 50, it means on average you're starting to go to that test center 3 times to pass that test to get to 100. So if, for instance, the pass rate is 35%, to be 100% sure you're going to pass that test, you need to go 3 times. Now obviously some people go 5 times and some people only go once, and you have the capacity to go only once if you set yourself up to only go once. But if you start getting to the point where you think, well, this is cheaper, or that is this or that, then it's not going to happen. And honestly, guys, you have to do not be penny wise and pound foolish. This test is not a joke. Okay, so you fail if you get a serious or dangerous fault. That is an automatic fail. Now, a serious fault is, for instance, if you do get to a traffic light and the lane you're in is supposed to turn right and you drive straight through, that is a serious fault. It's normally, the examiner won't let you get away with that, or it's unlikely. And that would be a serious fault because it wasn't dangerous, unless there's some reason that turns into a dangerous fault. Okay, examiners use judgment calls that aren't always explained. Now, judgment calls, I spoke about that last week. Judgment calls are situations where the examiner hasn't made a decision as to whether it's going to be a minor fault or a serious fault. A dangerous fault will never be a judgment call. If the examiner has to hit the brake because you nearly hit the kid on the crossing, that would be a dangerous fault, and there's no judgment about that. So there are some faults that are very clearly serious faults or very clearly dangerous faults. But there are other faults which are judgment calls, and those are the ones that are in the gray area between the 2 fault types. Okay, we're looking at spiral roundabouts, dual lane logic, etc., etc. That's all covered in the actual roundabouts things. So that is really important. And remember, this thing that this is a difficult test is very real, people. Okay, now experienced driver trap. This is just absolutely what it is. It is what it is. The reason drivers who are experienced often find or often fail is because of inadequate clearance. And that is where they are not making sufficient space between themselves and parked vehicles or stationary objects. And there's not sufficient space. Because they are experienced, they're used to squeezing through gaps. And once they start driving, squeezing through gaps, and they squeeze, or they go into spaces that feel a little bit tight, then you are getting to the stage where that is inadequate clearance. And there are a lot of drivers who are experienced drivers who make that mistake, because you have to have half a meter to a meter between yourself and any stationary objects that you're overtaking. So you have to hold back, you have to create a tunnel situation, and that's identifying it early. Mirror check routines. Experienced drivers tend to be watching their mirrors and are aware of traffic around them, but then they don't display watching their mirrors. And that often gets them 3 faults for mirror checks very quickly, because they're not showing the examiner they are watching their mirrors. Now, I always say what you've got to do is, if the examiner or the sat-nav says turn right at the next junction, immediately do the relative mirrors, center mirror, right-hand mirror. You might not signal yet because you might be far away, but at least you've done mirror, and that puts you in good stead. Then when you say, okay, I'm ready to signal, now you do the center mirror, right-hand mirror, signal right. As long as it's safe to turn right and you haven't got some idiot trying to overtake you on the right-hand side as you approach the junction. Okay, that's why you check your mirrors. Roundabout positioning, flatlining on open roundabouts. That is a common error. People flatline open roundabouts, and the examiners are very quick to pick up on flatlining on open roundabouts. You need to know what the examiner is looking out for, and by developing a procedure and a natural habit and having habitual driving process that fits what the examiner needs is really, really important. Okay, all right. The 4 fault categories: minor faults, small errors, up to 15 allowed. Normally the one where people pick up the most is, sometimes it's observations. They pick up minors on observations. I always say that if you are not picking up 1 or 2 hesitation marks, your chances of passing are very minor. You have to be careful enough that you are verging on hesitation. And I'm not saying you must be such that you actually hit a lot of hesitation marks, because you can. If you get into a mini roundabout and you have no idea what shielding is, and you've got a massive shielding opportunity on the mini roundabout, the examiner will knock you for hesitation. Okay, so minor faults, maybe not reading 1 or 2 shields, or not seeing a change in priority in a lockup and not taking advantage of a lockup can also create a minor fault. Okay, serious faults, those are just a fail. Like the lane example I gave earlier, you're in the wrong lane and you go straight instead of turning right, not a good idea.